Hello, listeners! Welcome to Stars of the Golden Age, a show that highlights the lives of legends from film, music, and the birth of television during Hollywood's golden age and the few years surrounding it. I am your host, Erin Carlson. Today, we will be discussing Kate the Great, Katharine Hepburn. I just want to say quickly that I launched a Patreon account, and I want to give a shout out to my very first Oscar-level patron, Debbie A., who happens to be my mom. So she's required by law to support my podcast. But she says she actually loves it too. Thank you, Mom! If you want to learn more about the bonus content available on Patreon and how to join, I'll share that info at the end of this show. Right now, I want to get right into our story. This episode is dedicated to one of my oldest and dearest friends, Melina. This one's for you. Katharine Houghton Hepburn was born on May 12, 1907, in Hartford, Connecticut, to parents Thomas and Katharine Hepburn. So, Katharine was a junior, and she was able to keep her birth name when she got to Hollywood, which we don't hear about happening too often. Katharine was the second of 6 children for the Hepburns. Her family called her Kathy, but I'm going to refer to her by her chosen nickname of Kate going forward. Kate and her older brother Tom were best buds. Tom was a junior too. The 4 others were on their own for names. Kate said she always wanted to be a boy. She envied her brothers and wanted to be just like them. And her open-minded parents said, "You be who you want to be." Imagine that in the 1910s. The elder Katharine was heavily involved in those crazy new fads called feminism, sex education, birth control advocacy, and women's suffrage. Please recognize my sarcasm there. I'm pretty proud of her. That's really cool. Women in her position had to deal with a lot of pushback in their activism during those days. She worked with famed sex and birth control educator Margaret Sanger. Sanger is a founding mother of Planned Parenthood, and the elder Katharine Hepburn was highly involved in its early efforts. She worked diligently towards improvement in women's health and women's rights. Kate recalled that their family home was the meeting ground for all the progressive radicals of the time. Imagine that, how cool. Although Mother Katharine was a very busy woman, she always made time for her children. No matter what, her kids came first. And she always read them a story at bedtime, every single night. It was really important to her to enrich them all with literary greats. Katharine raised her children to be strong, independent, creative, forward-thinking individuals. She allowed them to share their thoughts and speak their minds. And she encouraged them to always follow their dreams and fight for what they wanted out of life. She wanted to raise strong children who would turn into strong adults. While Katharine was a little more on the encouraging and supportive side, Thomas was a pretty stern parent. He expected all of his children to excel and often urged them a little too hard towards success. He was known to really push them to be perfect. Thomas Hepburn was a doctor and alongside his wife advocated for birth control, a very radical idea at the time. This harsh parenting was extremely difficult for Kate's older brother and best friend Tom. He was diagnosed at a young age with a disorder called St. Vitus's dance, which is called Sydenham chorea today. His symptoms included uncontrollable, rapid jerking movements of the face, hands, and feet, as well as extreme anxiety. Well, Thomas Hepburn wanted perfect children, and this, quote, nervous tic of Tom's was a disgrace to the family in his eyes, and he made that pretty well known. Of course, Tom could not control this neurological disorder that took over his body, but his dad didn't care. He ridiculed his son often, furthering the emotional impact the disease already held over him, which in turn made the physical symptoms worse as well. On the morning of March 30th, 1921, Kate went up to the attic to fetch her brother Tom for breakfast. She walked in to a horrific sight. 13-year-old Katharine Hepburn discovered her 15-year-old brother Tom hanging from the rafters with a curtain tied around his neck. He was gone. The anxiety, his physical condition, and his inability to be perfect in his father's eyes was too much for him to handle. This, as you can imagine, would remain the greatest tragedy of Katharine Hepburn's entire life. This was sadly not the first death by suicide the family had experienced. Mother Katharine's father died by suicide in 1892, and his brother in 1897. Thomas's brother died by suicide the same year as Tom's death, and another of Thomas's brothers took his life just 6 years later. That is a lot of loss to suicide for two families, and a lot for Kate and her surviving siblings to carry. Not surprisingly, Mr. Hepburn did not allow open mourning from his children. They were told to be brave and act confidently. Crying was not allowed. Grieving was forbidden. Katharine recalled, quote, "The hardest part about it all was that we weren't only told to not talk about Tom, we had to pretend that he was not ever a part of our family, to act as if he'd never lived," end quote. Anyone who's ever mourned the loss of a loved one, especially in such a shocking way, can understand how impossible this is, and how dangerous that can be to mental health. There were now two Katharine Hepburns, the Kate before her brother's death, and the Kate after his death. She would never ever be the same. Kate turned 14 shortly after her brother's death, and that can be a challenging time of life for anyone. Imagine tragically losing your best friend and brother, and then not being allowed to properly mourn that loss, especially having been the one to find his body. Then add in the junior high rumor mill surrounding the incident. She began experiencing crippling anxiety. It was a terrible time for young Katharine Hepburn. She said, quote, "I knew something that the other girls did not know. Tragedy," end quote. She used all the strength she had to finish the school year, and then she convinced her parents to allow her to finish high school at home with a private tutor. Luckily, they agreed. Outside of school, in her home life, Kate buried herself in books as a distraction from her agonizing grief. Books offered her somewhat of an escape from the reality of her immense sadness. After finishing up high school studies with her private tutor, it was time to go to college. But Kate didn't know what she wanted out of life. Her father, of course, was really pushing her to figure it out and make sure it was something great. So she enrolled in Bryn Mawr College in Philadelphia and moved into the dorms. Remember now, Kate had been very secluded socially since her brother died about 3.5 years before she began college. This culture shock of going from the seclusion of her home to a bustling college campus full of her peers was a painful experience. She ate all of her meals in her dorm room and avoided all social activities. Well, everything except the theater group. When she got involved in theater during college, she finally felt like she could come out of her shell, the shell that she'd been in for years. After commencing her first play, Katharine recalled her emotions like this, quote, "Nerves, fear, applause. I finally felt fascinated. It was right there and then I decided to be an actress," end quote. Kate was very well received on stage in her college productions. She'd found what she wanted out of life. She graduated in 1928 with a bachelor's degree in philosophy and history, but it was acting that she wanted to do. The degree was only to appease her father, but when she told her father what she really wanted to do, he was irate. Her feminist mother, however, was really proud of her daughter for wanting to be something besides a mother, housewife, or secretary, for stepping outside of the gender norms of the day. Katharine Hepburn went right to work trying to find the next stage for her feet to land on. During the 6 months after college graduation, she did some stage acting in Baltimore, Minneapolis, and New York, and she was gaining some great experience in the process. She met the woman who would become her best friend shortly after arriving in New York. Laura Harding was a New York socialite and introduced Kate to her inner circle of New York high society. Then an old college friend moved to town. His name was Ludlow Ogden Smith, Luddy for short. Kate and Letty began as friends, and then that friendship blossomed into a romance. Letty was extremely proud of Kate and did everything he could to support her and her budding acting career. That budding career hit a few bumps along the way, but Kate was strong and determined, and she knew any obstacles she encountered were part of the journey, and she was going to overcome each and every one of them. I'm going to quote from Kate herself about what happened next. She said, quote, "Sensing my sinking mood, Letty proposed to me, and I thought, why not?" End quote. That's so funny. Katharine Hepburn married Ludlow Smith on December 12, 1928, at her parents' home in Hartford, Connecticut. And they set off to Bermuda for their honeymoon, with Kate's best friend Laura and her boyfriend in tow. Just so romantic. Kate continued to appear in plays during the next few years and took every opportunity she could to refine her skills as a great actress. She wanted to set herself apart from others. She wanted to be unique. A stage actor never knows who's all watching them from the seats of their audience, and on any given night, a seat in the sea of seats may be occupied by someone from Hollywood. And that night came for 25-year-old Katharine Hepburn in the summer of 1932. RKO Pictures invited her for a screen test, and she was in. They were specifically looking for someone to play the role of Sidney Fairfield in A Bill of Divorcement, which was being directed by George Cukor. Cukor was an immediate fan of Hepburn and knew she would go places, and this would be the beginning of a great friendship between the two. Katharine Hepburn was offered $500 per week in her contract with RKO. Well, she knew that they really liked her and wanted her for the part in A Bill of Divorcement, so she countered that offer with a number 3 times the amount. She confidently insisted on $1,500 per week. And guess what? It worked. It just goes to show that it never hurts to ask, or confidently insist in this case. Katharine Hepburn relocated to Los Angeles from New York, but her husband had to stay back on the East Coast for business. Her best friend Laura, however, did go with her, and the two found a very nice place to rent in LA. Kate and Letty's 4-year-old marriage was already a bit strained at this point, and this distance wasn't exactly going to help things. But Kate had to follow her dreams, and her husband did support her in doing so. The film A Bill of Divorcement was a pretty sweet movie to make a Hollywood debut in. Kate co-starred alongside John Barrymore and Billy Burke, and both the movie and Katharine Hepburn herself received rave reviews. She was an overnight star. She was such an overnight star that when she returned to New York to reunite with her husband, Letty couldn't even get to his wife when she disembarked her train because of all the photographers and reporters who also wanted to get close to her. The couple sailed to Europe to celebrate Kate's Hollywood contract and success, and also just to spend some time together since they had been separated for so long. Their marriage needed some TLC, and Letty was really hoping this trip would be the opportunity they needed to get back on track. Katharine, on the other hand, was ready to transition into her new life in Hollywood without a husband. She was a strong and independent woman, and she wanted to present herself to the world as just that. Poor Letty. When they returned from their European tour, the photographers and reporters were there again, waiting at the port for their new star. When one reporter asked her if the rumors of her having a husband were true, she replied jokingly, or at least half-jokingly, quote, "I don't remember," end quote. I guess the trip wasn't the rekindling miracle Letty had wished for. Everyone loved Katharine Hepburn, and she was soon making way more than her original contracted salary. And then less than a year after her arrival in Hollywood, she made the film that would earn her her first Academy Award, Morning Glory. And then the smash hit Little Women. She had skyrocketed to the top.
Have you ever wanted to travel to the past and follow the trails of crooks, killers, and outlaws from yesteryear, all from the safety of a time machine? Well, on the Vintage Villains podcast, I examine the people, the cases, and the zeitgeist of the year in question so we can learn what made folks tick back then and better understand that which plagues us in the overwhelming present. Subscribe to Vintage Villains now on your favorite music or podcatcher apps, and I'll be seeing you soon in another century.
Letty and Kate were never able to repair their estranged marriage. In fact, Kate had been dating her agent, Leland Howard, for most of her time in LA. Letty and Kate officially got divorced on April 25, 1934, after 5.5 years of marriage, mostly spent apart. Kate and her BFF Laura traveled to Mexico together to secure this hush-hush divorce. The marriage was over, but Kate and Letty would always remain friends. She felt relief at having her marriage finally behind her and vowed to never get married again. She also never wanted to have children. She loved her independence, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. She knew what she wanted, and she created a life that fit that ideal for herself. This didn't stop Leland Howard from proposing to her immediately after her divorce, though. She said no. So he went off and married someone else, and he broke Kate's heart. Enter Howard Hughes. The guy is known for his way of flipping through women, and he really wanted to make Katharine Hepburn his next one. He pushed so hard to make it happen that Kate finally gave in. He must have been quite the charmer because even knowing his womanizing reputation, she almost immediately moved in with him. The two dated for about 3 years, and he even taught her how to fly. Hepburn was up for another Academy Award in 1936 for the movie Alice Adams, and the film was also nominated for Best Picture. Bette Davis took home the statue that year, and Mutiny of the Bounty for Best Picture. Of course, all of Katharine Hepburn's movies weren't smash hits. Everyone has flops. And then her stardom took another hit when the Independent Theater Owners of America declared independent, unconventional stars like herself, Greta Garbo, Marlene Dietrich, and Joan Crawford as, quote, box office poison in 1938, simply for being strong, self-sufficient, and a little different than the mold of the perfect Hollywood woman. She held her head high and continued to always put her best into all of her roles. And the more she felt she could relate to and embody the character, the better she felt her performance was. Sometimes, though, she felt a role and the direction itself held her back from greatness. It came to a point, in fact, that she didn't like what RKO had to offer her and her career. So, in 1938, she bought herself out of her contract for a whopping $75,000. $75,000 in 1938 adjusts to over $1.6 million today, so she really wanted out. 1938 also brought devastation to Kate and her family when a hurricane swept through the East Coast and destroyed her family's summer home in Fenwick, Old Saybrook, Connecticut. She was reportedly there with her family during the storm, and they barely made it out alive. This home is where Katharine Hepburn held her most cherished childhood memories, and it was the place that always brought her peace. And she continued to go there as an adult whenever she needed to heal or to reflect on life. She was an avid swimmer, and she would spend hours swimming there in the Long Island Sound. Losing this home was losing a piece of herself. But the Hepburns are strong, so they rebuilt. You can't knock that family down. Back to Hollywood. As a free agent, Kate jumped right on over to Columbia Pictures to do Holiday with Cary Grant, which she'd starred in on Broadway, so it was a nice experience for her. Speaking of Broadway, Hepburn wanted a little break from Hollywood, so she headed back to New York and performed on Broadway in a production of The Philadelphia Story. And as many of you probably know, she brought her role back to Hollywood and onto the silver screen when she did The Philadelphia Story for MGM in 1940, again pairing up with Cary Grant and also Jimmy Stewart. In fact, she actually bought the movie rights herself before the play opened because she knew it was that good. Her foresight put her in a powerful position to then sell the film to MGM, make some money, and maintain creative control over the movie. She was given the power to handpick the film's director, and she chose George Cukor, of course, who had just been let go from directing Gone with the Wind just months earlier. She was also given the control in choosing her co-stars. The Philadelphia story was a gigantic hit, and Katharine Hepburn was absolutely on fire with its huge success. She was nominated for another Academy Award for her work on the film. In 1942, Katharine Hepburn first starred alongside Spencer Tracy in Woman of the Year. And with that, both of their lives would forever change. She and Spencer Tracy had instant chemistry and quickly began a romantic relationship, even though he was married. He was a devout Catholic, and divorce was out of the question. Kate said she was instantly attracted to him. She said it was simply magic. She said, quote, "It took me until I was 33 years of age to fall in love and know what it really meant. His needs came before mine, and I looked for his approval with everything that I did. Love has nothing to do with what you are expecting to get, only what you are expecting to give, which is everything," end quote. Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn would go down in Hollywood history for their long, deep love for one another. Well, Spencer Tracy initially did not want to star alongside Katharine Hepburn in Woman of the Year. He said, quote, "How can I do a picture with a woman who has dirt under her fingernails and who is of ambiguous sexuality and always wears pants," end quote. But once he met her, he understood. Let's talk about those pants. The pants that really symbolize Katharine Hepburn's overall individuality, strength, and uniqueness. For those of you who aren't aware, Katharine Hepburn was known for her choice to wear pants in a time when women simply just did not wear pants. Women were expected to wear skirts or dresses at all times. But Katharine Hepburn wasn't an ordinary woman. She wasn't going to follow what society deemed acceptable behavior if she didn't want to, especially when it came to the way that she represented her own body. When Katharine Hepburn arrived in Hollywood, Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with her or how to react to her. She came confidently marching in, with pants on of all things, and she spoke her mind and stood up for herself. She was often described as tough and masculine. There was a time and place when women could actually be arrested for wearing pants in public under the charge of masquerading as men. Yeah, I know. And if a woman did dare show her pant-covered legs outside of the home, she was often labeled as being a lesbian or having, quote, penis envy. There is a famous story regarding Katharine Hepburn and her pants while she was under contract with RKO. She regularly showed up in pants, even after being asked not to, so the costume department removed her pants from her dressing room while she was on set. First of all, stay out of my dressing room. Well, Kate wasn't impressed either, and her solution was to return to set in nothing but her underwear covering her bottom half, and walked around with confidence like that until her pants were returned. Plan backfired. Even almost 20 years later in 1951, while staying at Claridge's Hotel in London, Kate was informed that women were not permitted to wear pants in the lobby of the hotel. So what did she do? She used the staff entrance instead. Problem solved. Give a quick internet search today for Hepburn pants, and you'll see how influential she was in bringing awareness to the awesomeness of comfortable and stylish slacks for women. Her style is still around today. I have a couple of pair of wide-leg Hepburn pants myself, and I love them. Katharine Hepburn wasn't alone in her pursuit of clothing freedom. Marlene Dietrich and Greta Garbo were also known for wearing pants, but Katharine Hepburn was the definite trendsetter for this radical behavior. So, thank you, Miss Hepburn. Katharine Hepburn caused a stir in 1948 when she backed Progressive Party presidential nominee Henry Wallace. The Progressive Party had a more laid-back attitude about the Soviet Union, so many believed those who supported the party were communist sympathizers. Kate's public support of the Progressive Party even led to the FBI monitoring her actions for several years. And it affected her work as well, with protesters gathering outside of theaters showing her films. But it would take a lot more than that to knock down a star like Katharine Hepburn. She was still on top. On a visit to her parents' home in the spring of 1951, Kate and her father went for a walk together. When they arrived home, they found Kate's mother dead in the home. She had died of a cerebral hemorrhage. Kate had found the body of another beloved family member, very unexpectedly, just like her brother when she was a child. It was another heartbreak for her. Her father would live into his 80s and passed away in 1962. Later the year of her mother's death in 1951, Katharine Hepburn starred with Humphrey Bogart in The African Queen. She was in her mid-40s by then and wanted to really showcase her acting talents. She wanted deeper roles, knowing that youth and youthful beauty only took you so far in Hollywood during that time. She wanted to give a great performance, and she certainly did. Audiences loved it, and it earned her another Oscar nomination. Vivien Leigh would take home the Oscar that year for A Streetcar Named Desire. Hepburn took a little break from working for a few years in the early 50s. When she returned to the screen in 1955, it was for the movie Summertime, which gained her yet another Oscar nomination. And yet another the following year for The Rainmaker. Girl was still on fire. And she and Spencer Tracy were still on fire too. The two of them had a very deep connection, but it wasn't always easy. Their relationship was unconventional. Spencer Tracy was married, and he was a struggling alcoholic and suffered from depression. His sometimes erratic behavior because of his struggles with alcohol definitely added some difficult moments to the relationship. Kate recalled after his death that he struggled constantly with his immense guilt over the double life that he was living. Katharine Hepburn turned 50 in 1957, and she continued to wow audiences on screen. She also returned to the stage, much to the delight of the theater audiences. It took some time to adjust to the transition her characters took as she aged and the fact that she was now getting parts that weren't starring roles. But hey, at least she was working. People still wanted Katharine Hepburn. Spencer Tracy's health began to decline in the mid-60s, so she took a lot of time off from making films to care for him. She pretty much put her entire career on hold and put her entire focus on him. She just wanted to be with him as much as she could. For the first time, Katharine and Spencer moved in together. They'd always kept separate residences until this point. They lived in a cottage on George Cukor's property. Spencer mustered up all the strength he could to return to the screen with Kate in 1967 for the film Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which would be their last film together. This movie was groundbreaking, a very important message about the realities of interracial relationships in the 60s. Spence wanted to go out strong and do something great. Spencer Tracy's monologue in the film when he's addressing his daughter, her fiancé, and his parents, the way Kate looks at him in that scene and the way he looks at her, those tears in her eyes as he spoke are real, and the look between them is a look of pure, true love. He says during this speech in the movie, quote, "The only thing that matters is what they feel and how much they feel for each other. And if it's half of what we felt, that's everything," end quote. Spence and Kate shared a long, deep look after this line, her eyes barely visible behind the tears. You can see that all of their love through all of their years together was piled on them at that moment, and they both knew that their time together was almost over. This movie would finally land another Best Actress statue in the hands of Katharine Hepburn, 34 years after her first win when she was fresh on the scene in Hollywood. Tragically, Spencer Tracy passed away before he could see the film's success and that highly coveted statuette awarded to the love of his life. He died from a massive heart attack on June 10, 1967, the very day after filming had finished on the film. Kate was with him when he died. She called Spencer's wife Louise immediately, and she arrived with their children right away. When it was time for the funeral, half of Hollywood was there, but the most important of all of Hollywood was absent. Kate silently grieved out of respect for the Tracy family and stayed out of the public eye as they mourned. A few weeks later, she called Louise Tracy to extend an olive branch, to suggest that they be friends, and Louise replied, quote, "You see, I thought you were nothing but a rumor for 30 years, end quote. Kate was shocked. She thought she absolutely knew. And maybe she did and was just grieving, but that's how Kate recalled it. This was heartbreak Katharine Hepburn hadn't felt since her brother's suicide. Spencer Tracy was the absolute love of her life. They had been together for 25 years. Some say they were romantic soulmates, some say he was gay and she was a lesbian and their union and his marriage was a cover for that, but it really doesn't matter. What matters is that they truly loved each other, and they each provided love and happiness to the other for a very long time, something many people never have. The way Kate talked about him, it was clearly true love. Mourning the loss of her great love, Katharine Hepburn kept herself busy in her work. She earned her third Academy Award the year after Spencer's death in 1968. She was the first actress to be a 3-time Academy Award winner for Best Actress. And she was the second actress to win back-to-back Academy Awards for Best Actress. The first, some of you may remember, was the great Louise Reiner. I believe those two still remain the only women who have ever achieved that. Hepburn did 7 movies throughout the decade of the 1970s, 1975's Rooster Cogburn with John Wayne being the most successful. 1981's On Golden Pond with Henry Fonda and Jane Fonda earned Katharine Hepburn her 4th Best Actress Academy Award. She was awarded her first Oscar when she was 27 years old and her final Oscar when she was 74 years old. A long and amazing career. But she wasn't quite done yet. She continued to do some film work every couple of years through the 1980s and early 1990s. Katharine Hepburn's final screen appearance was in the 1994 TV movie called One Christmas. Her on-screen career spanned an impressive 6 decades. She also devoted a lot of time and energy in the 1980s and early 1990s campaigning for Planned Parenthood and other progressive causes. She continued the work her mother had championed 70 years earlier. In 1996, Katharine developed a serious case of pneumonia, which resulted in hospitalization, and her body never quite fully recovered from that experience. Tough as nails, though, she fought on. Her advice on aging was, quote, "You suddenly realize what a tremendous opportunity it is just to be alive. The potential. If you keep a-going, you can actually do it. So just keep a-going. You can win. It's when you stop that you're done." End quote. Well, we all have to stop eventually. On June 29th, 2003, a true Hollywood legend left this world. Katharine Hepburn was an impressive 96 years old. Before her passing, Katharine Hepburn was named the top female American screen legend of all time by the American Film Institute. I want to share something that she said in her autobiography to describe herself. Quote, "I am happy. I have a happy nature. I like the rain. I like the sun, the heat, the cold, the mountains, the sea, the flowers, well, I like life, and I've been so lucky. Why shouldn't I be? I don't lock doors. I don't hold grudges. Really, the only thing I'm not mad about is wind. I find it disturbing." End quote. I can relate to this so much, as I hope many of you can as well. And metaphorically, Katharine Hepburn was the sun, and the rain, and the heat, and the cold. She was the mountains, and the seas, and the flowers. And I'm very sorry, Miss Hepburn, but you were the wind too, strong and fierce. You were one hell of a woman. Now, I would like to share some other interesting facts I learned about the great Katharine Hepburn during my research. Bullet point number 1. Throughout her many Oscar nominations and all 4 of her wins, Katharine Hepburn did not attend any of the Academy Award ceremonies for them. She said her work was the prize. The statues weren't of importance to her. Bullet point number 2. Kate's father managed her money throughout her career until his death in 1962, when Kate was in her 50s. He sent her an allowance to live on through all of those years. Bullet point number 3. Katharine Hepburn plays Anthony Hopkins' mother in 1968's The Lion in Winter. Hopkins later said her voice from this work was one of his inspirations for his later voice of Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs. Creepy. Bullet point number 4. Katharine Hepburn was Vivien Leigh's maid of honor when she married Laurence Olivier. Not because they were great friends, they weren't really, but more because Kate happened to be with Olivier's chosen best man when they decided to get married. Bullet point number 5. Katharine's first Oscar was supposedly in her family home that was destroyed by the hurricane, but it was later recovered and returned to her. Bullet point number 6. Kate's real-life niece, Katherine Houghton, played her and Spence's daughter in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Bullet point number 7. Katharine Hepburn reportedly never watched Guess Who's Coming to Dinner because it was Spencer Tracy's final film, and it would be too difficult to watch. Bullet point number 8. I just wanted to share a quote from Katharine Hepburn because I liked it. She said, quote, "The average Hollywood film star's ambition is to be admired by an American, courted by an Italian, married to an Englishman, and have a French boyfriend," end quote. Sounds like a decent plan. Bullet point number 9. One last quote from Kate because I think it's wonderful advice for all of us. Quote, "If you're feeling sad, do something for someone else, and that will help both of you," end quote. Yes, this absolutely works. In conclusion, Katharine Hepburn was a trailblazer for every single woman in the world, every single person in the world. She saw societal norms and expectations, she didn't like them, and she confidently strode through the world with her own style, her own convictions, in her own way. There was a mold for women to fit into, and she didn't like that mold, and she wasn't going to strain herself trying to make herself fit. Her parents wanted to raise a strong, independent woman, and boy, were they successful. She arrived in Hollywood ready to become famous, and she expected to be compensated for her fame. She knew what she was providing for the studios, and she demanded that she be paid accordingly, and to be paid as much as, if not more than, her male co-stars. She was a sharp businesswoman. As quoted in the documentary Call Me Kate, quote, "She would use her own intelligence and her own savvy to negotiate deals and changes in scripts. She's opening doors that she doesn't necessarily realize are going to be there for other women to walk through," end quote. Thank you, Katharine Hepburn, for being a role model to women everywhere. Thank you for bringing so much energy and depth to our screens. And thank you all for listening. If you want to receive some fun bonus episodes and get into our Movie of the Month Club, head on over to patreon.com/Stars of the Golden Age podcast, or just go to the website or app and search for the show. There are 2 levels of support. The Emmy tier is $4 a month and includes a Stars of the Golden Age sticker, a shout-out on an upcoming episode, access to the Stars of the Golden Age Discord chat rooms where we can all connect and chat about our love of everything Golden Age, and our monthly Movie of the Month Club. And this month's Movie of the Month is Arsenic and Old Lace with Cary Grant. And then there's the Oscar tier of support, which is $8 per month. And in that tier, you get everything I just mentioned in the Emmy tier, plus a full-length bonus episode each month covering some really fun topics. In the regular show feed, you'll find a teaser bonus episode about Golden Age nightclubs. And the next one that will only be available to Oscar-level patrons is Golden Age Studio Rules. So if you want to hear that and all the other monthly bonus episodes I have planned, Patreon is the place to do it. And you get access to the Stars of the Golden Age Discord chat room so you can talk to my mom and me. That's all that'll be in there for now. Please also follow the show on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And a 5-star rating and positive review on your podcast platform would really help the show. Thank you all so much. My main source for this episode was the book Katharine Hepburn, A Life from Beginning to End by the Hourly History series. I also used a documentary that included tons of interview content of Kate's own voice called Call Me Kate, which is available on Netflix. a Vanity Fair article by Marcy Bianco and Marin Johns from May 12, 2016, another Vanity Fair article from Hadley Hall Mears from October 7, 2022, Oscars.org, Britannica.com, and the apple of my eye, IMDB.